What a magnificent morning. So, the evolutionary explanation for bloody historical human episodes is quite enlightening. It allows you to understand these things much better than you otherwise would had you not been exposed to the evolutionary lens. So let's take, for example, this concept of humans reaching ecological dominance. And this is the idea that once humans have become comfortable in their environment, and comfortable as defined by not being wiped out by natural disasters, that's pretty comfortable, and not having to worry about these sorts of threats nearly as much. Once we humans reach that level of ecological dominance, then the biggest threat to our continued long-term survival is other humans. Uh-oh. That's bad news, because this is actually evolutionary. So within we humans, we individual humans, there lies a genetic program that says if a certain set of conditions is met, then become a butchering, genocidal maniac. That's actually encoded in us. Alright. Why is that important to know? That's important to know because we want to prevent such an innate genetic program from wielding its power over us. And we want to say, no, we're not going to do that. Despite that set of conditions that, historically, if they were met, our ancestors will have fallen into that way of being and become the butchering, genocidal maniacs that they have been programmed to become. Despite that same set of conditions being met in the modern times, we reject such a genetic impulse and we say no. That's the idea of ecological dominance and how we humans have been genetically programmed to become crazy, like the Vikings, berserkers. Become crazy when a certain set of conditions is met. That's a nice little evolutionary explanation for what happens to humans from time to time. We can also see in another more recent episode of human history. This is the episode of human history where Europeans first encountered Native Americans. We can see that the evolutionary lens is very enlightening to understand that episode. So the boys set sail across the ocean and they were sailing into the unknown. It begs the question, like, how did their society view the men who were set out into the unknown on this ship across the ocean? Were they losers? Were they bums? Because if you're living a comfortable, decent life where you're living, you're going to be fairly hesitant to jump on a ship and sail into the unknown. You have to be like a crazy person, a person who seeks sort of semi-suicidal adventure. That's crazy. Or you have to have it really bad where you are to say to yourself, yeah, this risk is worth it, because if I stay here, I'm done for. At least if I take this risk, there may be something waiting for me on the other side. So again, actually there again, I'm pretty sure there's a genetic program that says that sort of makes that calculation for you as an individual, where you say, yeah, I'm just leaving. without like sort of formally calculating, how is my life here? My life is pretty good. I have a lady. I have some good food. I have some good housing. Without all that, the program just says, yeah, kick on, lad. Or lassie, I wonder. So, it begs that question. But these lads make it over to the Native Americans. And what happens is fascinating. Okay, well, first off, this is one of the most brutal genocidal episodes of human history. At least that we know of. I'd imagine there's some pretty brutal genocidal prehistory too. But we have this written. This is recorded. This is historical, not prehistorical. What's the boundary, you might ask? The boundary is pre-written records is prehistory. Post-written records, history. So the Europeans get to the Native American shore. What happens? Well, fast forward, Europeans managed to take what was once the Native Americans, their land, their resources, transfer of resources. That's what that frontier was. Transfer of resource frontier. Where one lineage encounters another, and again, coming back to that concept of ecological dominance, each lineage has reached that ecological dominance place, and so, right now, the biggest threat to their continued long-term survival, other human beings. But the evolutionary lens is very enlightening here, because what actually happened was European microbes did an awful lot of the genocidal heavy lifting for the Europeans. So Europeans get to the Native American shores, and the pathogens for which Europeans had developed immunity, because Europeans co-evolved alongside these pathogens. And why that is the evolutionary or ultimate explanation, but right now we're going into the proximate explanation. Europeans developed an immunity to these pathogens, so they were circulating around the population for a long time. And these Europeans who were on the ship across the Native American shore brought those pathogens with them and infected the Native Americans. The Native Americans, because they did not co-evolve, their immune systems were naive to these pathogens. They hadn't the time to co-evolve alongside these pathogens and develop immunity. And so once these pathogens reached the Native American populations, they caused disaster and wiped out the vast majority of the Native American populations. And then the Europeans allowed that genetic program of genocidal mania to take over, and guns did the rest. Guns and steel. Yeah, nasty. But let's go to the evolutionary explanation. Why did the Europeans have immunity to these pathogens? And here is the kicker. This is fascinating. So the Europeans landed in South America, I'm pretty sure. And in South America there's only a single wild animal that is domesticatable, and that's the llama. And so that llama was domesticated, whereas in Europe there were many wild species that were domesticatable, like the pigs, cattle, sheep, goats, the wild ancestors of those species. So Europeans domesticated them, and in animal husbandry there was zoonotic diseases bouncing back and forth from humans to animals, and this just created conditions for bacteria and microorganisms to thrive, to propagate. And so circulating among the animals and people of Europe will have been diseases that otherwise wouldn't have evolved, because it would have lacked the interaction between humans and animals. So we get that rise in zoonotic diseases, and some new diseases evolve, and humans, or European humans, develop immunity to these new diseases, whereas in the Americas there wasn't that animal-human interaction, not nearly as much, so it didn't provide enough time or space for zoonotic diseases to spread and become endemic. So once that happened in Europe, then there was this suite of pathogens circulating in European populations that Native Americans were completely naive to, their immune systems. So once it hit their Native American populations, boom, it just spread like wildfire, and just cause tragedy. So that's how the evolutionary lens is so enlightening. I don't know, that really helps me, anyway, to understand what's happening in the world, what has happened, and give it to me succinctly, in a concise sort of paragraph. And that does a lot. Excuse the use of the metaphor for the second time in a different context. The evolutionary lens does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of intellectually understanding what's going on in the frickin' world. What has happened, what is happening, what will happen. So hopefully that is equally as enlightening to you as it is to me. Let's go.